Uh, and Ray, do you consent to us sharing this recording outside of the club?
I do. Yeah, that would be wonderful. If it's any
Okay.
good, feel free to share far and wide.
All right. I'll work that out with Jorg afterwards. Thank you.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, yeah, you are the author and the owner of this, of course, Ryan. Okay, over to Ryan now, and I will now mute everyone. And as I said earlier, if you have a question, unmute and ask the question. But otherwise, try to stay muted so we don't have any background noise. This is very distracting to the presenter. Okay, you're on. Oh, you you're muted too.
You muted everybody, including me. Okay. Well, thanks, Jorg and Sosa for hosting the Hangar Talks and for having me present here. Before I get started, I'd love to get a little bit of a sense of kind of people's familiarity with Condor simulation. So I actually have a polling tool that you can use on a second device or a second window at menti.com. So if you go to menti.com and you enter that code in, or you use the QR code, you can interact there. There'll be a few points throughout the presentation. I also pasted the link for Menti, the direct link in the chat, so you can get it there. So yeah, just to start things off, I'd love to hear from you. Do you fly Condor? If you never have, if you tried it before, maybe you own it, but you just don't use it. Maybe you dabble it a few times a year, weekly, maybe a few times a week. Just kind of getting a sense of your familiarity with this tool. So yeah, give you a few more seconds for that. And yeah, so it looks like we have a few people that maybe tried it, but obviously don't own it. And quite a few people that fly weekly. I know one of the popular tasks for Canadian pilots is the proving grounds that are going to be happening, or that's happening later today. That's happened on Sunday nights at 8:30 Eastern. So okay, that's good. It gives me a sense of kind of who uses Condor. Now, if you fly Condor, what type of flights do you mainly do? Do you just sort of, just kind of go fly around in single player mode? Do you like get a task and try to fly that in single player? Do you do online, but just more fun flights or team flights, or do you do online multiplayer races? Just to love to get a sense of sort of your usage in this regard. So it looks like it's yeah, a bit of sort of a mixed response here. About maybe just a bit less than half are doing kind of online multiplayer races, and it looks like the majority are sort of using it more for single player usage. So yeah, that's great to know. And one last question related to your use of Condor is, do you fly Condor with virtual reality like goggles, like Oculus Quest, for example? Maybe it's like, what's this virtual reality thing? Maybe you've never tried Condor in VR. Maybe you tried it once or twice, or maybe you own the VR and that's what you use all the time. And this is actually an important question in my mind, and we'll get into how Condor works in VR in a little bit later on in the presentation. So that's good to know, and thank you for sharing that. So with this presentation, I want to cover kind of these topics. So first, we're going to kind of look at kind of the bigger picture, like what's the shift to simulation that's happening with these sorts of sports and why it's important. I want to talk a bit about the problem with progressing in soaring, like there's some major obstacles, and want to look at those, and then look a bit about how Condor helps at all levels of piloting. Then I'm going to talk about what I call the magic recipe to sort of unlock this like virtuous cycle of progression with Condor. I think there's a few things that you throw them together and you get this very intrinsically motivated learning that starts to happen and take place. Then I give a few practical, some of the practical how-to on like, you know, what kind of system, how to get started. The majority of the presentation isn't going to be as focused on the how-to because I'll be able to send out resources afterwards for some of that piece, but I'm going to give some time for it. And then also kind of whatever time we have left at the end can be question or answers. And I'm happy to get into more of the how-tos. I'm fairly knowledgeable on Condor from the technical and the setup standpoint. So and Condor is actually one of the major hindrances or downsides is it's a very kind of cobbled together system to be able to get it working like fully. So it's not super tech friendly. And so that's one of the obstacles. And so, you know, maybe if there's a few questions, I can give some pointers as we get going. So, you know, I what I wanted to call this presentation, but I don't think Jorg thought it was a good idea. I wanted to call it Condor Soaring Simulator, fly it or go take up pickleball. But I think you'll gather that I am pretty enthusiastic about Condor. And the reason for this is we invest like a huge amount of time, money, and risk into the sport we love, but we get such a tiny window where we actually get to like do it, to go practice it. And I think to have an esport and to have a tool like Condor that like replicates so many things so well, it's just an incredible opportunity that any serious pilot should not be missing out on. And to give you just a bit of a backdrop and a story to where a bit of my passion for the esport comes from, I want to go back to the 2022 Canadian Nationals. Is a fabulous event with incredible weather. And this picture here is on the awards banquet night. And this night, I was getting probably my second helping of cabbage rolls at the Ukrainian buffet because, you know, us club class pilots, you know, we need to get creative about our ballast. So I was in the buffet line again, and Bruce Friesen, the contest director, he whispered to me something about, he's like, you'll be pretty interested in the day's results because at the last day of the contest, you don't get your results scored instantly. All the other days you upload your track and you get to see your scoring right away. But for the final day, they shut that off so that there can be a bit more of like anticipation and a reveal at the awards time. So when Bruce told me this, my heart kind of like jumped a little bit. Like I was pretty excited because I didn't tell anybody this, but going into the event, I sort of had like a stretch goal for myself where it's like, I'm not expecting to win the competition, but I'm like, my stretch goal is to win one task. And so far I hadn't succeeded at that. And that was the last, you know, the contest was over and maybe I made my goal. Maybe I did it. And if you know, kind of, you know, how long I've been in soaring and my background, you know, as a competition rookie, my very first glider competition, that goal of winning a task might seem a bit ambitious. But if you knew that I had just completed my glider pilot license 1 week before the competition started, surely that must be like delusional at best, or worse, a dangerous case of Dunning-Kruger effect, or AKA intermediate syndrome. But what if this, you know, competitive cross-country gliding wasn't just the domain of like very experienced, very veteran sky gods, but what if it's actually something that was accessible to newer pilots, particularly if it's approached with training, with good preparation, with a good mindset, and particularly the use of very effective and innovative technology. So in terms of my kind of background to getting into gliding and how I sort of wound up in the sport, as a child, I remember CBC used to, between like scheduled programming segments, they would run these short interstitial kind of segments of like B-roll footage or educational stuff. And I remember that one of the clips I was just captivated by, it was, it must have been at Yosemite. It was these steep cliffs. And I saw these guys like hanging from kites in sleeping bags, it looked like to me, like as a small child. And I was just absolutely fascinated of like them like soaring around on these cliffs in these like simple machines. And so I always had a fascination and you know, a bit of obsession with flying as a child. I, you know, built RC airplanes, crashed RC airplanes. And then shortly out of high school, I went immediately to start working on my pilot license with the idea in mind of getting into commercial aviation. So I did about 35 hours you know, in Cessnas and working on my license, but I decided not to go in that direction career-wise. And so then I stopped flying because it was so expensive to fly. But I still have this passion where I want to be in the air. I want to be flying just for flying's sake. And then I remembered back to that you know, that CBC footage, and I'm like, yeah, hang gliding. That's going to be a cheap way to fly. And once that idea was in my head, it was like, I just had to do it. And the moment I picked up a hang glider, didn't even have to be in the air. I just picked up and felt it. That was it. That was my thing. I was like, I was hooked. So I did hang gliding for 20 some years. I had a short break where I didn't have a hang glider, and I did paragliding. I got about 100 hours in paragliding. I helped co-found Instinct Wind Sports, which was a hang gliding school in kind of the Kitchener-Waterloo area in Ontario, and I instructed on weekends. But the thing with hang gliding that would get to me is there could be days, and it looked like a good day, like, you know, just looked like nice conditions, and all the hang gliders were sinking out. We're not staying up, and we get on the ground, and the other hang gliding pilots are like, oh, this day is not soarable. And I'm like, nah, I'm not so sure about that. And I'd go to OLC and I'd see what the glider pilots were doing. And I have to admit, Jorg, there's probably a few times before I met you that that I cursed your name, seeing these, you know, 500-kilometer type flights on the OLC when we're stuck on the ground, just because the thermal spacing was maybe too wide that day to be favorable. So it, you know, kind of piqued my interest in the potential of bigger cross country. And so during summers, when I visit summer vacations, a couple times I went to, and we're from Saskatchewan originally, my wife and I. So vacations, I'd go to Saskatoon Soaring Club, and I got in a handful of flights a couple of times in the summer. And so then in 2021, our head office for the charity I work for was in Hamilton, and it shut down. Went fully remote because we had a lot of kind of staff that were remote anyway. So our office shut down, and my family and I, we kind of made that that pandemic move. We moved back home to Saskatchewan. And as soon as I did that, I was like, okay, I'm gonna, you know, time to pick up gliding. There's a bit more community, a bit more opportunities for gliding rather than hang gliding out here. And so, kind of late July 2021, I kind of officially picked back up / started my glider training. And that progressed very smoothly, and pretty shortly. That season of 2021, I started doing kind of longer soaring flights. I was doing laps of the short proving ground circuit because I didn't have my full license, so I wasn't allowed sort of out of reach of the airfield. So I just did lots of long soaring flights and these proving ground laps. But that was actually going to kind of prove a mistake in hindsight, or a challenge. But that winter, what I did is before I moved out to Ontario, I picked up this AL-12 microlight sailplane, because sort of my idea with gliding is I still sort of more wanted to do hang gliding. But this AL-12 is sort of like the combination of both, because you can fly it and thermal it just like a hang glider. but then you got a lot more reach. So I picked up this glider, and then yeah, that winter I put some Arduino in it and some potentiometers, and I mapped I mapped it kind of into being like, it's kind of like a giant joystick that you sit in, and I had that. And the bigger thing was I got some virtual reality, an Oculus Quest. And I had actually dabbled at Condor a few times over the years, even like back to like kind of 2010. I tried it a few times, but as soon as I had like the virtual reality, the immersion, like just made it a totally different level of experience. And so I actually like started to become really hooked on glider racing. And I was just so enamored with what like an amazing combination of strategy and skill, like all happening in 3 dimensions. There's no, and I like racing sports overall, but there's no other type of racing that had so much like nuance and like so many interesting kind of components to it as glider racing. So I got really like hooked on the idea of glider racing. I started to kind of participate in races 2 or 3 times a week. And probably the most important piece of this, it was my first long Saskatchewan winter in 17 years. So having Condor was just a massive help for that winter. And kind of getting into it at first, like it seemed that like the top guys in the races, the gap to them seemed huge. Like, how can they be so fast? How come they're consistently the same people are always winning? But at the same time, it was also really motivating because it wasn't just chance. It wasn't random. It meant that there were skills and there were techniques that could be replicated and could be learned. So, and I loved having that challenge ahead of me. And I think with soaring sports in general, it's that unending progression that makes it so addictive, where you're always like looking to go faster, fly longer. And that's what makes these sports so great. And so I found that like, finding these little tweaks, improving technique, making a better decision, all of a sudden these things start to compound. And eventually I found I was able to win some tasks. And then I stumbled on a competition showed up on the Condor Club site, which kind of lists all the different Condor events that are happening, called Proving Grounds. And it was happening on Sunday evenings through the winter. And that quickly became my favorite Condor race, because it was about 30 other Canadian like real life glider pilots that were flying it. And then we would get on these races, and then we would have voice communication through Discord and be able to kind of chat and get to know them. And that's the organizer of that contest, Chris Goff. He mentioned there that he was hosting the 2022 Nationals in Edmonton. And I was like, this is such a good opportunity. It's only like 5 hours away. It's springtime with like wide open outlanding options. So I'm like, this is an opportunity that I don't want to miss out on. This is something I got to do. So he started to explain that for, novice pilots, he wanted to see silver distance, off-field landing practice. And I was like, okay, no problem. I got that. I'll have it together. And so the club was supportive, and they offered to loan me the L33. We started practicing using XC-SOAR and specifically doing the assigned area tasks and kind of practicing use of the navigation equipment. So, I had a checklist of all the things I had to get together, camping gear and fixing the trailer and all these sorts of things, getting every detail. But there's one problem, is that it was almost May and the club's hangars were still buried in a snowdrift. And I ended up with only 10 days to be able to get, my checkout, to get my glider pilot check flights, to get in 7 solo flights, off-field landing, and a 50-kilometer silver cross-country flight. But it worked out. And then on Sunday, May 22nd, my daughter and we went out to the Saskatoon Club. I had my, my fresh glider pilot license from a week before. I got on the L33. I flew 57 kilometers upwind, back quickly, landed off field, packed up the glider, and then head straight on the road to Edmonton Soaring Club for the nationals, and really excited because the forecast was looking absolutely brilliant moving ahead. So yeah, it was what I was expecting and what I was hoping for. We had a couple practice days, and it was just really good to get out there in that confidence. Like the first practice day was minimum 248 kilometers and a 3-hour task. And it was just good to get that confidence that the conditions were very suitable to be able to easily fly a task and get back home. And so after it was, I had about 140 hours and 22,000 kilometers of racing in Condor. And I think all that, like that concentration of Condor, and then like kind of a bunch of early season flights, kind of intensive on that way, and lots of preparation and kind of getting in that environment. And I realized like, this feels really good. Like I feel very, it's not overwhelming, it's not intimidating, and felt very comfortable getting into that competitive environment. And so the first task day, it was a bit of a questionable forecast, and the first leg was going good for me. The second leg the second leg was, went pretty good, but then the third leg was a big blue hole. And this is one of the kind of when you have a low handicap glider, you can really pay a strategy tax sometimes. Like on this day, Jorg, he just flew directly over top the whole blue hole, just one final glide. But I had to stop to thermal a number of times slowly to get out of it. So I'm like, this isn't going to be very good. But then when we got the results in, it was fourth. I was like, oh, that's all right. So this kind of goal I had, maybe it's possible. Maybe I'll be able to win a day. And then the task 3, I finished third, so things were looking pretty good. But then I started making some mistakes. On one task, I put in 4 hours in the computer instead of 4.5, and I ended up 15 minutes early for the AAT. And the way that works is if you show up early, it's just wasted time. You only get scored to the minimum time. So it's basically like I lost 15 minutes just, centering thermals or flying off course. But then it was on the kind of the 5th day that I made the biggest mistake. And the task was going good. I thought it was decent. I upload my flight when I get back after the flight, and I see I get only 328 points. And I was like, what's going on here? So I put the task in CU, and I'm trying to figure it out. And what had happened is after the second sector, I'll just actually turn on my pen here. After the second sector, I thought I could just fly direct back to through this big sector, and I just advanced my computer, and then unintentionally, and it looks like I did it intentionally, but I basically deviated right around the side of the sector, missed it altogether by, I think it was like 1.5 kilometers or something. And yeah, I basically botched that day up. And so I made a number of kind of these costly, very kind of housekeeping errors. And I think I started flying slower. But then finally, for the 7th task and the last task of the events, I realized that, I need to kind of get back more to the Condor mentality where, flying more assertively because of the conditions were so good. It requires a more assertive approach, passing up weak climbs, passing up uncentered climbs. And so task 7, went well. I found some really nice cloud streaks from the first sector into the second sector. I ended up coming back about 3 minutes too early, but my time showed that it was 97 kilometers an hour in the L33. And so I was like, okay, this is good. But in the end, to sort of maybe make the story a little anticlimactic, it was Marion. He was just too fast that day. He took the final win, and he left me in second place. So even though I didn't quite make my personal goal, in the end, it was just such a successful experience. I had 10 flights, 40 hours of airtime, 2,400 kilometers. I finished every task, and I finished 7th overall, which would have been 4th overall if I hadn't made, that big kind of navigation error that I made. So kind of in looking at that event and kind of the success of it from kind of my own personal flying progression, I know that like kind of my 500 plus hours as a hang gliding pilot, it definitely was a big help. But I would actually attribute that maybe about 30% to hang gliding, to kind of how I was able to get sort of a quick start into gliding, and 70% to Condor. It just made such a huge difference in my preparation, and particularly just in the safety and kind of that intimidation factor and the familiarity of kind of a competitive environment. It was just a massive leg up for me as a new glider pilot. And so with technology, we just have these these magical tools for sports like glider racing and motor racing, sports that just have a severe scarcity of time where you're actually able to do them, and an extremely high cost. You may have seen on Netflix there was this movie that came out, Gran Turismo, which was about the transition of like a simulator racer into real life racing, and I'll just play a kind of a short bit of the trailer here.
What is this?
It's a contest. The best Gran Turismo players in the world get a chance to compete in professional racing.
Dude, this is real.
This is real.
I'm sorry. You really think you're gonna take a kid who plays video games in their bedroom, you're gonna strap him to a 200-mile-an-hour rocket? It'll tear him to pieces.
So that gives a little bit of some of the attitude that I think people sometimes have around simulation. But you know what? It's not 2011 anymore. They set the movie like it was, 2023, but the story actually happened in 2011. And it was maybe novel at the time that a sim racer would make this sort of leap to real racing. But now it's basically a kind of commonplace thing. You see like this news article, more sim racers going real world racing, and the trend is growing over month to month. And even the highest caliber motor racers in the world, here's some of their thoughts on what sim racing's like. This is Lando Norris, world-class F1 driver.
Hello everyone, welcome to Monaco. Welcome to my home, where Core Performance have just installed my brand new GT simulator to go alongside my Formula simulator. Today I want to talk to you about a few of the reasons why I have it, why it's so good, and why it's so important for me to use. Simulators have been something I have used since I was like 6, 7 years old, so almost 15 years of using simulators. And not only does it help me in just day-to-day life and doing it because I enjoy it, but it also helps me, especially over the winter, with my muscle memory, staying sharp when I'm not actually in a race car. But it's also helped me become the driver I am today. Starting so young, where it's more crucial than ever, is using it when you're 7, 8, 9, 10 years old. So what?
And this is what Max Verstappen, the best Formula One driver in the world, says about sims. Oh, wrong one. There it is.
What's the bucket list? What's top of the bucket list of what you would want to do after F1?
Yeah, so I have a lot of things going on. I mean, I love my sim racing. Some people think it's just a game, but it's not. And I have a lot of passion in that, and I have a lot of plans for the future to build something around.
So this interview is actually kind of hilarious because earlier the interviewer asked Max Verstappen, like, what are you going to think of your accomplishments, like winning multiple Formula One championships like down the road? He's like, when I'm 67, I probably won't care about it. So he basically says that like F1 is his side hustle and his main gig is sim racing. So in these in these sports and in other industries, simulation is just becoming a very like well recognized, very sought after tool for development and for progression. There's an example that was from the United States Air Force Academy, which is basically, I think it's their kind of glider cadet program. And they started using Condor, and in their study, kind of doing two groups, they found that they doubled the solo rates in their program, and that they significantly reduced kind of the amount of damage to gliders through the use of simulator training in conjunction with their program. So yeah, it's just sim use is something that's going to be growing. I think for gliding, it's probably the best opportunity, a strategic opportunity we have for growing the sport, for creating exposure for the sport. So it's just a really amazing opportunity for our sport as a whole. I'm just going to flip back to the poll here to get find out a little bit more about the audience and kind of where you're coming from in your goals as a pilot. So this first question is kind of more where you're at presently. Maybe you haven't started gliding yet. Maybe you're a student pilot, cross-country racing pilot. Maybe you're a social pilot. So you like teaching, you like maybe kind of soaring locally, but you're not, maybe presently kind of cross-country and racing is not sort of in your wheelhouse. So just to get a sense of this and where simulation is going to be useful for these different areas. This is good. And so the next version of this, next I'm going to ask, the next one's going to be kind of what's your goal? Where do you sort of see yourself as a pilot? And so it looks like we got some students, social pilots, cross country, and one person that's basically kind of being a race pilot is there, or maybe two people is kind of their main thing. And then what's your goal for gliding? Where do you see yourself? Are you a student pilot and you just kind of want to learn it, and then you've learned it, you've done it, or you want to get into cross country? Is racing where you want to get, or do you just like the idea of kind of staying as a more of like a local social pilot, instructing, kind of more recreational kind of view on the sport? So that's good. So there's a lot of interest in cross country, some racing, some interest in racing, and that's great. So this is where kind of with your kind of goals and where you're at as a pilot, this is the importance of kind of the use of simulation. So without simulation as a student pilot, your training will take longer and cost more. Without simulation as a social pilot, and I'm going to take it a lot easier on social pilots here today, because if your kind of approach to the sport is you're not as serious sort of in the progression and the kind of the competitive sporting side of it, and that's totally okay. As there's a lot of sports that I do, like table tennis or pickleball or things like that, where it's a hobby. I'm not serious about it. I'm not trying to train. I'm not really trying to get better at it. It's just something I enjoy. And that's totally fine. But the benefit for kind of a social pilot is if without simulation, you'll be less proficient and safe. So simulation can still be very helpful just for your proficiency at a proficiency level. As a cross-country pilot, without simulation, you'll fly shorter and progress slower. So you might say, well, I'm not racing. What does it matter? Well, if you're flying cross country, you're always racing. You're racing against the sun. You're racing against the weather systems. You're trying to get a longer distance within a window of the time that the day gives you. As a cross country pilot, you're racing. You're just racing maybe conditions more so than other pilots. And as a race pilot, without simulation, you'll fly solar and you'll make more mistakes. And as a retired pilot, you'll miss out on continuing your passion. And maybe most importantly, as a Canadian pilot, you will suffer dreadful long winters. And so in terms of gliding, and part of the challenges and the problem with making progression in soaring is there's kind of three main things. One is the frequency, which is basically the amount of times we actually get to do it, that we actually get to go gliding, that we get to do races or cross-country flights. Another obstacle is the cost. And another kind of challenge to soaring is what I call feedback or measurement, where it's actually very difficult to measure your performance in an accurate way. So these are some of the obstacles that prevent us from progressing well or progressing quickly in soaring. So to go back to the survey, my next question here for you, and this one uses more of a slide. You can just kind of hit a slider for number. Is if you're instructing, or maybe in your own experience, if you're not instructing, like kind of roughly how many flights does it usually take to get to solo? 100 flights. Okay, that's that's a bit. Okay, we're averaging 61. That 100 might have thrown us off. I don't know if that was accident or not, but yeah, the number of flights to get to solo is I've been told it's sort of in the 30 to 50 range, kind of approximately. So that's kind of roughly what it takes. And for the next one, this is only for people that fly across country, just to not skew the numbers too much. So if you fly cross country, how many good cross country flights a year do you get? So yeah, we're kind of around, looks like we're hovering right around sort of the 10 mark, which would be about consistent with my experience as well. The chances, the opportunities to do the thing we love is so limited. I guess it's maybe not as bad as, like, let's say like a UFC fighter that they train all year and then they get like one match. Like that's serious investment. So yeah, right around the 10 mark. And then this one is for if you race gliders, if you do contests, how many valid race tests do you get a year, kind of approximately or roughly? 2, yeah. Anyone else? I know there's a few of you. 5, 4. Yeah, that seems about right. Especially, I think if you can't do sort of gliding full time, if you're trying to fit it in on vacations and things like that, it's pretty limited. And so I did a little bit of the kind of calculation from my own experience on it. And so for the 21-22 season, I looked at, I had, which was a really great season because of the nationals, and I had 9 real life tasks. I guess I could count 10, but one of them was dual. And versus 113 tasks or races that I did in Condor. So I had 12.5 times more flying that I was able to do in Condor, or 9 to the power of 2.5. And then in the next season, I got 1 real life task. I had the opportunity for 2, I should say, but I sunk out before the start on one of them. So in the sport, that is like my main sport in life. Like it's my number one thing that I do, that I'm passionate about. I got to do it once the whole year versus 83 that I was able to do in Condor. And so that was like 83 times more that I got to do the thing that I'm trying to learn and get better at and progress in, are almost kind of 2 orders of magnitude. And then for training, similar thing, you'll progress. A lot of studies show 50%. Those are actually pretty limited in sort of their training methods. Other people have estimated around 80% faster in your progression, or 80% less kind of real flights needed in your progression to solo, which I would tend to agree with if it's done the right way. And my next question on the poll here is this one. This will be the last one for the poll. Is if you fly, what do you spend on gliding per year? So it's just kind of comprehensive: membership, tows, fees, travel costs, contest fees, rentals, or if you own, the insurance, the maintenance. Maybe there's depreciation or interest on your glider. Maybe there's, maybe your money you spend on the glider could be invested, earning interest, all those sorts of things. Kind of what do you feel is your cost in this? I don't know if I put this the right number, but that I must not put the right scale there. So that probably messes things up. So our numbers might just be skewed unless they're kind of doing it relative, which would then, that's going to be around 10, 15,000, 5, 10, 15,000 mark. So when I looked at my my own numbers on this, I did just some ballpark math, and I think I'm at I'm probably at I'm on the extreme budget end in terms of like how I approach gliding typically. I have a label, and I don't put hull insurance on it. The clubs in Saskatchewan are the cheapest in the country, or if not the world. And so, but even adding all that up, it looks like, about 5,000 a season roughly, to be a pretty active pilot, to try to fly one contest. Versus if I look at the cost for Condor, if say I spend about $1,000, and it's again cheapskate sort of range, building a Condor system, and it was good for 5 years, which it could easily be, that would be about $250 a year to fly Condor. So basically, for 5% of the cost, it's 20 times more affordable. And there was a really interesting point made in the paper by John Cochran, which is on the SAC website. That's called "Just a Little Faster, Please," and he makes this really really insightful point that small differences in pilot technique outweigh huge differences in expensive fiberglass. And he gives kind of a calculation on it, and he says that if you do 3 unnecessary circles an hour, and that's going to cost, roughly about 1 minute and 20 seconds of time, that's basically worth $20,000 more glider, that performance difference. So, just a fraction of a little bit of time can be worth a huge amount in what you need to buy performance. And so this is, again, back to Condor could easily improve your times by 5-10%, no problem. And so I don't think there's any other investment in gliding that will make as big of an impact on your performance, maybe besides if you have 0 vario and you get a compensated vario. That would probably be the only thing that can make a bigger difference than Condor and the training and the proficiency that it gives. For those of you, if any of you like memes, this is how I sort of see it. You get Condor, it's 20 times the amount of training. That's 5% the cost. That's a 400 times efficiency if you do the math on it. It's 2.6 orders of magnitude. So anyway, basically to kind of make the point with a little bit tongue in cheek and a little bit of hyperbole, it's just highly effective, highly efficient. to use simulators to do this sort of thing. And finally, with the idea of getting proper measurement, this is another area. So if you've how do you know if you've had optimal performance on a given day? Like, did you perform well, or just did the day perform well in spite of you? Was it just that good of a day? What do you actually have to measure your performance against? And even in real life competitions, there's just so much variability in the weather. Even, a small distance can be different air masses. And so without having data, it's difficult to make any comparisons, and it's difficult to evaluate performance and decisions. And this is actually where Condor is extremely useful. And some people might say, well, Condor's, not like real life. It's too simple. It's too static. And that's actually a feature. It's not a bug. It's because Condor, it actually provides sort of an ideal like laboratory environment that really allows for accurate comparison and measure like in very fine detail. And that can result in a very rapid feedback learning cycle. So this is some of the kind of problems that face like being able to make good progression in soaring, and why the use of a simulator, why the use of Condor can make a big difference. So before I move on to the next segment of things here, just wondering if there's any questions for the time being. If not, I can also take questions at the end. Just open the floor for a second. I don't know if there's any in the chat, Berg.
Are there no questions in the chat? There's actually one question that says, when are you going to talk actually about Condor? I think he wants to know your secrets.
Yeah, we'll get that. Sorry. Thank you. Okay. So
maybe a quick addition to the question, how many flights to solo? What I go by is age plus 20.
Okay. Yep.
You say about $1,000 to get started?
Yeah, well, I'll get into a little bit of information, kind of the what it's about. So what is Condor? So Condor, it's a soaring simulator that kind of gives the complete experience on your computer. You can fly gliders, progress up to high level of competition. And the core is the state-of-the-art physics model. So the physics in Condor is extremely good, is extremely realistic, and that's what makes it such a great simulator. So what's Condor useful for? Solo training, intermediate skills, cross country, mountain flying, aerobatics. You can use it for practicing your PDA. Competition flying, and especially advanced analysis and coaching, and competitive. And it's just on its own, it's an excellent esport. It can be used for really well with solo training. This is just kind of a short example of what my daughter did for a grade 9 school project.
Last summer, I went gliding for the very first time. So for my inquiry project, I wanted to improve my skills. I did this by memorizing checks, doing lessons, and practicing in races. There are a few different checks.
So she kind of practiced her checks, and then she...
of Canada's... For the lessons, I followed along with the Soaring Association of Canada's instructional videos. I did these lessons. Here are some of the more interesting...
So what she actually did was she took the videos from SAC and she pinned them in the virtual reality cockpit. And then she would play the video, and then she would fly the lesson for herself alongside of it. And it was, a really kind of effective and useful training method that she did for kind of some of her, for some initial training.
Interesting.
So on on Condor, you can go to a website, is glidingschool.com, and you can also get like a lot. There's basic lessons available in Condor, but you can actually get more kind of a more thorough curriculum, and it follows the British Gliding Association pre-solo curriculum. It breaks all their lessons down, and it has them available in Condor. So this is a useful resource for at kind of the initial solo training stage. You can go through that curriculum. You can practice it on your own time. It's good, if possible, to get instructor feedback. You can send your flight tracks. You could screen record and get feedback from an instructor, but it's a great opportunity to practice and get time in. There's another kind of benefit. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, is that built into Condor itself?
No. So this one, there are lessons that are built into Condor, but these are added lessons that you basically download from glidingschool.com. You copy them into your Condor lessons folder, and then you have a lot more advanced or more thorough of a curriculum that can be used with Condor, and it's pretty good. So that's kind of an added one that you just have to go to that website and download it and put it in. So just an extra step, but yeah, it's not packaged with Condor out of the box. So for emergency procedures, this is another area where it's extremely useful, because for emergency procedures, it's the type of thing that you can talk about it like, hey, do this, do this, do this, but that doesn't actually, it doesn't work very well when things go bad. You're not just thinking through consciously what to do. Like, emergency stuff is the type of thing that needs to become what we call muscle memory. It needs to be automatic, but it's really difficult to do that in real life, because to simulate high repetition of risky scenarios, that creates high risk. Whereas to do it in a simulator, you could practice a winch rope break over and over and over multiple times and get it to kind of get into your muscles and get that response to become automatic. So for emergency procedures, is something where Condor can be extremely useful. There's another kind of opportunity in it, and that's to use it for deliberate practice. And deliberate practice is kind of having focused, structured, intensive effort on specific aspects or specific skills. And it can be really difficult to do this without simulation. So let's say, for example, and what I've kind of found for my daughter, the round out was a challenge with instructing, or with learning that was a hard part to kind of catch on to timing the round out. But then Condor is able to create a lesson which basically loads you directly into final glide just before round out, and you can quickly, rapidly practice that round out in that specific area kind of over and over and over in quick succession without, needing 20 minutes tow and all this time between flights. It allows very rapid practice. So that's an area for like solo pilots. You can really do this sort of targeted, intensive, deliberate type practice. I still think there's a bit of an obstacle or a problem still with club-based simulator usage. The thing with it is it's still a scarce time-limited resource. When you come to the club, real flying becomes the priority. And so the club simulator is something that can maybe complement instructing a little bit. Maybe you can go practice a few things on it a couple times, but you still don't really get a lot of time, like deep immersive sort of time at hand. So one thing I would kind of propose, or just as an idea, I think a concept would be do at-home sim-based training. So I think new students could begin, if they're all into gliding, they could begin with purchasing a simulator setup to begin with, or maybe clubs could have some portable sims that they rent or borrow, and they can begin their real life training on the simulator. And they can actually do a bunch of training, or they can sequence training around what's happening in real life, and kind of have requirements to be like, okay, you know what, do this on the simulator, and then now we'll progress in real life. So I think this could be something that could really speed up that solo progression. The studies that were around the 50% mark, they weren't doing a really immersion-based type of approach. And you could, for the price of ASK 21, you could buy like about 20 high-end, really high-end simulator units. So I think there could be a lot of opportunity in gliding to start to explore other methods of training, doing more immersive based. There's something that's called the 100-hour rule. And it's the idea that if you spend 100 hours a year, which is just 18 minutes a day in any discipline, you'll be better than 95% of the world in that discipline. And 100 hours is awfully sort of roughly the mark when a person starts to become a lot more competent. Maybe they haven't reached mastery, this kind of a thing. It's like, 10,000 hours to reach mastery, but 100 hours is sort of where you start to hit that zone of feeling capable, of feeling calm. You're not just sort of like trying to keep thinking ahead of yourself, but you start to get more into that maximal performance zone. I think with like more immersive, like if you really like, if you had your own Condor setup and you really got into it, you started enjoying it, you started doing a lot of races, and you have 100 hours, 200 hours before, during your training, it's just going to make such a difference and speed things up so much. Another big area that Condor can help, and kind of at the intermediate stage, is Condor is excellent for getting really good and proficient at your thermaling. Condor has very good thermal models, and it demands good technique. I know when I was dabbling in Condor, like around 2010, I probably only played it a few hours or a few times, but I even noticed from that, then into the next season of hang gliding, that my thermaling, I noticed a marked improvement in my thermaling, even just from a few hours in Condor. So it's really good for teaching that. And then this is the piece kind of at the advanced training. So the cross country, the race training, this is where Condor really starts to shine. And this gets to the challenge of having really good data and having really good measurement on your performance. So when you're racing Condor, you're doing tasks there, you're going to have 40 to 100 very direct comparables in the same conditions to evaluate your skills and your decision against. So it's a very, very good sounding board or yardstick to measure. And Condor is ruthless. It's a ruthless, relentless, like uncompromising coach. It's extremely demanding, but it'd be kind of like if you're a musician, a jazz musician, you get really good at your skills. You get really good at mastering the fundamentals. And then with those fundamentals, you can improvise and you can freestyle. And I think Condor's, sort of the same kind of thing. It demands good fundamentals, which then allow you to extract so much more to real life. And just as a small example of this is a flight from Thursday, and what I did here is basically 1, 2, 3. I did 3 circles sampling in a row, and that was it. That cost me the race. Just those 3 tiny little things. That's how demanding Condor is of good performance, because you have so many great pilots to measure yourself against, and that's a good thing. Here's another example from an FAI task that we did this past week. So the FAI is kind of officially kind of promoting Condor as an esport. They're getting behind it. So they're putting on these great tasks. And they did this task. It was more narrow thermals, and it was very demanding of thermaling precision. And so that's one area where I've been able to, through deliberate practice, I've gotten better at. And I was able to do well at the task. And from me to the next person on that server, it was about a 6% difference. So it was about $60,000 worth of glider that I was able to make up for, because Condor has helped refine my skills in terms of thermaling precision. So I see a hand there. Is there a question? Feel free to unmute yourself.
Well, thanks so much. So I'm computer stupid, and I'm trying to figure out how to do some of these tasks. So you just showed an example where your daughter was trying to land the glider. Can you show us, for instance, if I want to practice that final approach, how I would do it, or if I want to practice spins and things of that nature,
Yep.
how do you get that? Technically, how to get to those types of things,
Yep.
or how to find that somewhere.
Sure. I'll save that for the
much.
question and answer, just so I can screen share my Condor and just show you a couple things, if that's okay. Yeah, that's it's just extremely useful for getting your fundamentals, getting your precision down. And you'll see in Condor that it's so like fine grained. It's so close that you'll have races that it's fractions of a second on like a 2-hour race. It's fractions of seconds between the leader. That's just like how precise it gets. There's one race that happens on Tuesdays and Thursday that's called US Soaring. It's run by a glider pilot, Davis Chappins. And he basically kind of gives this format for how to go faster in gliders. And he breaks it down into 4 rules. And he kind of makes the point that like flying fast is actually really simple. It only comes down to some very basic things. You either glide better. Oh, I skipped there. You either glide better, you climb faster, so you thermal better, you fly a shorter distance. And number 4 is you basically don't get yourself in jail. So you don't get low, you don't get stuck. And basically trading off, balancing between these 4 different rules is how you get fast. And there's only 3 decisions, is when to stop. So is the climb good? When to leave the climb, and then which way to go. So he kind of breaks things down in this formula, but then how that gets operationalized is for every task, there is basically a report generated of your performance in these 4 rules of gliding better, climbing better, flying straighter, and not getting stuck or putting yourself in jail. And it basically gets calculated down to almost on a per second level. You can see the areas where you need to improve, or the areas where you're weaker, where you lost and gained time. So for example, on this race, I could see that I was a little bit faster on glide. I was a little bit faster on thermaling, but I lost about 42 seconds because I detoured a little bit more. So you get really, really accurate, really fine-grained analytics and coaching. And this really just helps with, it's going to just make you faster. Another example, integrating with real life is I did a flight last summer from Cali, and I flew back home to Saskatoon. And I noticed when I looked at it in WeGlide that I was doing just a ton of thermal attempts, and I was losing like 3% of my time in the flight was spent on thermal attempts. And I was basically losing a ton of speed. And what I was able to do was then, okay, now I know what I need to focus on in Condor. And I was able to develop a lot better of a technique and approach for the thermal entry and how I select the thermal, and then then exiting versus doing a circle sampling. And that doing that also then made me faster in Condor. So it really creates this sort of virtuous cycle between real life and then being able to practice it in simulation. And I think another kind of really big piece with Condor is this intermediate transition in pilot retention. So there's a quote here that, like, if you want to build a ship, you don't just drum up the men to gather wood and divide the work and give orders. And say you teach them to yearn for the vast and endless sea. And like my plan for gliding was kind of sort of just to be a side gig for hang gliding. The idea of racing was maybe like in the distant future, retirement. But once I got like a taste of how rich the sport was, how rich glider racing was, I was like all in. This was like became a big thing for me. And so Condor was the thing that really got me into the sport fully. So I think it's a really excellent tool for getting that retention, because what I hear is that once pilots kind of get into cross country, that's when they start to you get better retention into the sport. And just some examples or success stories. This was the Condor world champion in the Grand Prix. He learned to fly at 32. 2 years later, he was the Norwegian champion after 110 real hours and 1,000 Condor hours and 5 podium places. There's another top kind of 100 ranking pilot, been flying Condor since 12 years old. And this is Daniel Sazin. He flew about 400 or 500 hours in Condor, and then at 18 years old, he won the 126 championship, and he set a world record for 1,000 kilometers, which is that's quite phenomenal in a 126. And one other example here is John Blythe. He's a retired pilot from Western Australia. He decided to kind of retire from gliding, early and kind of, before it was too late. And so after 32 years in gliding, he retired early, and he said this, that I've learned more about flying gliders fast and efficiently in 3 years of Condor than I did over the 32 years I flew gliders in real life. That's just some of the kind of success stories on it. And this is kind of what I call to get Condor to work, to get sort of this captivating learning where you're intrinsically motivated. It's kind of like have your cake and eat it too. Like you're training, you're progressing, but you're really enjoying it. And this is kind of what I'd say is the recipe is virtual reality. To me, that's critical to make it enjoyable. The online multi-pilot racing, I think that's another critical element, voice communications, and finally a learning mindset. So this was a message just from yesterday. It was from a top North American pilot, and he just said this. He was really reluctant. He's asking all these questions about VR, and then he sent this message. I just spent a few hours playing with the Quest 3. I'm absolutely blown away. I was skeptical, but I'll never go back. So VR really does make a big difference. It's so worth the investment. I really encourage that if you're serious about gliding and serious about progressing. And the online racing is, I think, really important, is because Condor is really boring on its own, frankly. It is. I mean, it's kind of chill, but it's really thrilling to have a live race, to have this sort of event that you're maybe looking forward to once a week. It really makes it come to life. And yeah, it's just an exciting sport. You could check out some of the virtual gliding live streams on the FAA YouTube, and you get a sense of like kind of the action and how the racing works and how thrilling it is. And the other piece that was really worth it is getting on the voice comms. So get in the races, get on the voice communications on Discord. It's often been said, like, what's the best part of gliding? It's the people, it's the community. And you get some of that even in Condor. You get a bit of a sense of community, and more so much shared learning. And the other thing I'll point out, that you don't have to be intimidated to go on to the voice comms. There's a lot of people that only listen in. So there's not expectation to talk or share anything. At first, I'm more of an introvert, so I didn't like the idea of like intruding on a party or joining kind of the voice communications, but it just enriched the experience a whole lot. And then the final ingredient to really get this sort of like recipe to make Condor work for you is your mindset. And you really need to like shift yourself from into a approving mode instead of like into an improving mode instead of approving mode. So, if you're an experienced pilot, you probably have to check your ego, because Condor will probably humble you. But the question I have for you is, do you care about looking fast or actually becoming fast? And races, I think, is a misleading term. It's more like training and coaching experiences. The focus is on learning. It's on development. You don't have to like worry whether you're winning or not. And you need to know there's no skill-based matchmaking. So you're going to be paired, if you're starting out in this, you're going to be paired up with the best pilots in the world potentially. So it's a massive range. So don't have like huge expectations on like feeling like you have to reach a certain level or certain mark. It's okay. The goal is improvement, and the competition, it only exists to be able to give that like accurate performance measurement and to gamify the experience. There's really, you know, there's nothing at stake. No one's making money. It's okay. But having that mindset, like I'm there to learn, it doesn't matter if I win or not, that will help sort of like kind of free yourself up to enjoy the experience more. And these are kind of the goals you can have in your progression, is just, you know, first, just to finish the task, get around the course. That can be a goal. Then try to, you know, have a goal of top 75, 50, 25%. Then maybe next is top 3 you finish. Then maybe you win a regional task. Maybe you start winning and finishing top 10 consistently. Then eventually there's a thing called CC rating, which is kind of your overall kind of ranking across competitions. Maybe you start working on improving that. And then maybe after that, you start looking, can I win world class? Can I win FAI, kind of these world class tasks? Can I win world class contests? And then can you top Witold Rozak, who is like far and away the best Condor pilots. So those are that's sort of like a progression arc to Condor. But set your goals and just have that learning mindset, and that will free you up to enjoy it. In terms of just like the basics of getting started, and I know probably a lot of you want to get to the how-to, but the how-tos are, you know, easy for me to share resources for. One is buy Condor 2, get the game. Next, this is what I would really encourage, is you can join the US Soaring Discord, because that's probably the most like helpful community. So if you have any questions, if you're having tech things, if you're wondering anything, there's a group of people that's extremely helpful and can help you out. Then you can try some tasks. So Condor will run on basically almost any PC or laptop. It doesn't require a lot. You can use a mouse, and you'll still learn a lot. You'll start to get exposed. It probably won't be enjoyable enough to keep you hooked, but it will give you an idea of it. And then from there, you can start to actually build a system that will allow you to enjoy Condor more thoroughly. In terms of like the races that are available, you can go to Condor Club. There are races Sundays at 8:30 for proving grounds. Those are club class, lots of AATs, lots of Canadians, and they're heavily thermal tasks. So I find these ones are good, sort of relevant to my kind of real life flying. US Soaring is 8 p.m. and 9 p.m. Eastern, very kind of progression development focused. So it'll be lots of learning, and it's mostly thermal tasks with a bit of help from ridges sometimes. There's also tasks that Great Lakes Club does on 7 Eastern. Gatineau does one Tuesday at 7 Eastern, I believe. They use TeamSpeak instead of Discord. And there's also daily races with a lot of pilots called Chin Chin races at 11:30 a.m. Eastern. So these are some of the opportunities to get into doing tasks. And then in terms of like building your system, I'll just give a few examples. This is what I call the cheapskate rig. You can build a VR capable Condor system for under $1,000. So for example, you grab some rudder pedals off of Kijiji. Maybe you buy kind of like a simple $50 joystick. I just quickly grabbed these off of Kijiji just before this as some examples, but around $500-600, you could get a basic gaming computer used that will run Condor, and you could pick up a Quest 1 for $70. If your prerogative is just like spend as little as possible, you can fly Condor and get still get a lot out of it, and still sort of get that like hook of it, like being really enjoyable for under $1,000. This would be more sort of a mid-level system. So, about a $1,500, very, very capable gaming PC, way more than Condor actually needs. Maybe you spend $200 on rudder pedals. I think rudder pedals are the part that is you could actually build yourself a better set of rudder pedals, probably for like $30. If that's, if that's your sort of thing. These are the part that seems a little bit overpriced for what you get. You could get a force feedback 2 joystick, which is kind of like the go-to recommended joystick for Condor. They don't make it anymore, so you have to find it on eBay. I saw this one on Kijiji, $25. That's an excellent price. I don't know if it's sold, but usually these are 50 to 100 used. And then you get a Quest 3 virtual reality for 650. Quest 2 is also good bang for the buck. So that's kind of a mid-level system. And then to look at it as a high-level, kind of a high-end rig, this, really, really nice setup with like it's full force feedback. So like that you actually get like feedback and like motorized controls, even rudder pedals. I think this was about 7,000 Canadian. And then the Quest 2 and like a higher end PC would be around 3,000. So it's going to be around 10,000 plus. And this would be a really high end rig. I think this one's actually a really good price for what you get for this thing. And that might seem really expensive, but if you look at a perspective of like, what do you fly more? It's actually relatively like, even this high end rig is like, it's arguably, this is, a good investment for the amount of flying and the amount of use you get out of it. So yeah, that's just a bit of a sample of some of the systems and rigs. So in terms of some of the how-to, I'm just going to open it up for questions at this point, and love to jump into some of that. I can go to the first one, which was about loading flight lessons, and then feel free to start throwing your other questions out. So I'm just going to maybe pull up Condor here on the screen. So for Condor, this if you're trying to do some of the lessons, if you have Condor, it's in the flight school. Can everyone see my Condor window? Just should ask that.
Yes.
Okay. So you go to flight school, and then there's lessons in here. So you can go to any of these lessons. So let's say you want to practice winch launching. You can go to that lesson. You can view it ahead of time to sort of see how it's done. You can read the description, and then you can hit try lesson. And that's how you actually like do one of the lessons. And there's intermediate, so you can practice thermal soaring. So that's to answer the question of like, how do you get to lessons? It's in the flight school section in Condor. So I'm going to just check out some of these other questions.
Can I just ask you a question? Sometimes the race is going to start in X amount of time and you're not racing. How do you get rid of that? And let's say you want to practice a spin or something. Can you just show us how you would do that? And if you want to just practice a landing or something, if you maybe just show a couple of those examples, that'd be fantastic. Thank you so much.
Sure. So if you want to practice a landing, you could go to traffic pattern and landing and then hit try lesson. It might still have that minute race timer. You just ignore that. So you could go to traffic pattern and landing. If you want to try stalls and spins, you could go there. You could try this. You could do a spin from anywhere, but if you want to like watch the lesson, you could go see the lesson here. So just go through these menus and you can see the different lessons. If you're trying to get the timer off, this is the only thing you can do if you're just doing free flights, is to go here and then just put the race in like in 1 minute with a 0 minute window. And then that timer will go away in 1 minute. It will be out of your way. Okay. There's another question here about the Varjo Aero with Condor. I think it's being used. I think I see that in the Condor forums. That's a very high, that's a very, very high end virtual reality headset. The thing I'd mentioned about like the non-Meta or the non-Oculus headsets is presently Condor kind of only has native support for Oculus headsets. So you have to add a few more items sort of to your tech stack to get virtual reality to work with other headsets. It's possible, it works, but it just takes a little bit more tinkering. Yeah. So did you notice any other questions in here, Jorg?
A couple of questions. So if you want to buy a certain plane like SK-21, or you want to download the background of Southern Ontario where you are and stuff like that, can you just demonstrate how you go about doing that?
Yeah, I can. Just hold on. Let me exit this. So if you want to download gliders, you go to Condor. You go to the Condor website, and you go here and you go to the Condor store, and you can buy additional gliders here. After you buy the additional glider, then you're going to go to Condor, and you will you'll go to that glider in Condor. So say you wanted the ASK-21, you go there, and then the key that you bought, you would hit activate, and you would put the key in there that you purchase on their website. So that's how you buy extra gliders in Condor. One thing I'll mention that is if you don't have Condor 2 and you buy it now, Condor 3 is going to be coming out shortly, and they will be giving a free upgrade if you buy Condor 2 in the meantime. So that's buying a glider. And then if you're looking for some other like accessories or like skins and stuff, there's quite a bit of stuff on Condor Club. And you can go to Condor Club and you can go to goodies, and you can find different items there that you can download and install on Condor. So that's where some of the extras are, but the gliders themselves are on the store.
Mac versus PC, does it matter?
It does matter. It won't run on a Mac. People have got it to run using a Windows partition or using Parallels. You won't be able to run virtual reality on a Mac. You probably can get Condor to run, but it'll be more tinkering. So there's a question here. Can you compare like IR, and that means track IR to VR? So track IR is where you put like a clip with lights, and then basically you move your head, and then your screen moves with it. And so that is helpful for the lookouts. Otherwise, you're having to use the joystick to move around. So it does help with some of the situational awareness. You still are restricted to like whatever size of screen you have. And you just don't get the in virtual reality, you are like in the glider. It's like a one-to-one experience. It's after I did the nationals and I had like 40 hours, I came back home and I hopped in Condor in virtual reality because I'm like, what is this going to feel like after a ton of real life flying? And I was just even more blown away. That's like, wow, it just feels so immersive. It feels so real. So it's the difference between 2 dimensions and 3 dimensions. That's what it is. And I would say like regarding virtual reality, almost like any like young people I've demoed it to, I haven't, and I've done like a lot of demos for like the cadets. I haven't really noticed almost any type of motion sickness. I find that some like older people, I feel like they feel it a little bit more. Most people overcome that. Using virtual reality in Condor is kind of like a low mid-level intensity virtual reality experience. So most people will adjust. The big thing is if you are in virtual reality feeling some type of motion sickness, is just to stop as soon as you feel it. If you push past, if you try to push through, you won't, and you won't get better. But if you stop as soon as you feel it, then you actually start to adjust to it. But I never really noticed much. I didn't notice any motion sickness with Condor, and other VR stuff does make me feel motion sickness. So in terms of the question of how do you use the keyboard in VR, some people, will peek through the bottom of their glasses to use it. Most people will start to get more mappings. So they map things to their joystick and they start to get more controls set up specifically on their joysticks. Myself, I have everything mapped because I'm in this like actual sort of physical cockpit. I have everything mapped to a singular Oculus controller that I control XC Soar with. I control Condor PDA. And so, yeah, we use sort of custom mappings to be able to do some of the controls. Yeah, so there's a point here. Yeah, another big thing with VR is it's so much easier for lookouts. The other pilots appreciate you having VR as well. So I'm just seeing if there's other questions here. Go ahead and feel free to unmute and ask any questions that you might have still.
If you wanted to download the map for Southern Ontario for your club for SOSA here, can you just show us how you'd run through that?
Sure, I can show you that. Okay. So to download a map, you can get it from Landscapes here. And the best way to do it, and this is what I recommend, is there's this link here. It's a dedicated installer. You download that, and it's a second program, and I'll just pull that up so you can see what it looks like. I just have to access it here. So I have Condor Updater. So this allows me to see all the sceneries. I can see the ones I have. I can see the ones I don't have. And I just, first of all, I take my settings and I match my folders with Condor. And then, sorry, I'm getting some type of message on this. So I get the settings and then it's not even letting me close it. I'm just going to try to close it from here. Okay. Well, anyway, you do it from there. Mine gave an error message popped up that I can't seem to close. So you click on I'll just try to hard crash it here and see if I can show you again. But yeah, Condor Updater will get you those landscapes and install them directly into your Condor folder. So the main difference between Condor 2 and Condor 3, Condor 3 is not out yet, so we don't fully know, but what I hear is the main difference is going to be the weather models, in that Condor 3 is apparently going to allow you to put in 3 different air masses that I think can sort of move. So they allowing for some different air masses and a little bit more variance with the weather. And then I think some moderate improvements in the graphics and kind of the look of it. I think those are the big changes between Condor 2 and Condor 3.
The other question is that how to, like, you're doing some simulation, you want to just pause and just think about this. How do you do that? And how do you do the emergency height and stuff like that?
So yeah, so you press P. The default key on Condor is P for so I'll show you the key mapping here. You can go to setup, you can go to input, you can assign controls, and then the default mapping to pause is P. That's also autopilot in multiplayer because you can't actually pause in multiplayer. And then to gain height is Q is the default key. It's called the miracle key. And that lets you gain height or recover if you've crashed. So if you want to see all the key mappings, again, you go to your settings, input, assign controls, and you can see all the different key mappings that are there to see kind of what's available for you to use.
Now, is there any like videos on the tricks and trades like you're showing us over here, so you don't have to go through all this learning pain that you know so easily?
Yes, there are some videos on YouTube. This is because as I mentioned, one of the good things to do if you're kind of really interested in getting into Condor is to go join the US Soaring Discord. because that's a place where you can ask like lots of kind of little questions and get fairly quick responses.
Ryan, can I make a comment?
Yeah.
On that? So I highly recommend people get just a little bit of background. I've been doing Condor for years, and I host flights and all this stuff. So one thing that I tell everyone is go find something called Condor orientation. Go Google it up. This was an American flight instructor. He used it for instruction, and the default Condor manual sucks. It's not very detailed. So go find Condor orientation. It's written for Condor 1, but almost everything is applicable.
Okay.
And it's a super useful reference. And he talks about a whole bunch of these things. Also some hints on how you can use it for flight lessons and stuff like this, on how you can save a replay, view a replay. So look up Condor orientation.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. Yeah. So that's definitely one of the challenges with Condor. It is definitely like sort of a do-it-yourself sort of system. So there are some barriers if you're not super technically proficient.
Any other clinical pearls from anybody? Would you say it's absolutely true? But I find when I try to play with it, I always get stuck, and I just end up shutting down the program until. So the stuff you say right now is so useful. I'm sure there's other things that you can say that would make the journey more easier for some of us, for practicalities, or from anybody.
Greg, I'll make a suggestion. You know, Ryan was talking about the Great Lakes hosts flights, GGC hosts flights. So hook up with, if it works for you for a schedule, hook up with Gliding Glatno Club or Great Lakes or one of those. And a lot of those people are not as serious as, let's say, the U.S. soaring guys and stuff like this. And, you know, it's maybe a little more relaxed, and then you can ask them for help. So just an option.
Yeah, I'm going to jump in. I did a presentation a couple of years ago about getting started with Condor, and I'm not sure whether that one was recorded. I think Rob Russell's on. He may be able to answer that. So we can do some of this stuff offline after this presentation's done.
Just make sure it's recorded. Thank you so much.
Welcome. I'm just looking at the chat here, see if there's other questions. Jorg, is there any that
I've got
that I missed on?
Most of the questions were already answered in the chat. So somebody posts a question and somebody else answers it.
Okay, perfect.
You did mention the U.S. Soaring Discord, and
Yep.
I haven't been able to find a link to that. Would it be possible to get a link to that put into the chat so that people can find that? And is that a good place for people to ask their simulator build questions?
Yes, that's it is a good place just to get kind of like lots of tech support and help. That's kind of why I recommended just joining it. Like, even if you aren't necessarily like fully like I'm going to start like racing their tasks, it can just be a good place to get help. I'll show you kind of I'll put the chat in the link here, but I'll show you kind of one thing with the Discords that I meant to mention is if you go to Condor Club, which is the main sort of site for finding competitions, you go to the competition page, and most of the competitions, or many of them, like the US Soaring, for example, right in the description, they give the Discord link. So that's kind of where they give the link for the voice comms. So that's how you find to get on the voice comms with different groups. So the same thing with the Proving Grounds, the Sunday night race. There'll be a Discord link there, and that's where you can join the voice comms. But I'll grab that link right here and have that available.
Can you put to spiral dive after, show how you do that, and just sort of link that way up there?
Oh, sorry. Can you ask that again?
Oh, sorry. If you want to do a spiral dive, can you show us how you would get into one?
That would be the same way as the other things. There is a spin lesson, and I think it has a spiral dive. So you go to flight lessons and then choose that scenario.
Mike Morgulis has his hand up.
Yeah, thanks, York. Thanks, Ryan. It's been a great presentation. Not so much a question as it is a comment. I put in the chat the TMU, the Ryerson kids have a soaring team, and Charles Peterson was sort of the main funding behind it with Youth Flight Canada, and they have a pretty basic simulator, with ABS piping, and it supports the rudder, the stick, the spoilers. Yep. We were doing some training with them, so some remote training using Discord, and so we could see what they were seeing as instructors. Yep. And so we have Toronto soaring instructors sort of riding along virtually, and then a few of us started going down to the actual simulator at Ryerson in person, and right away I noticed a few things that wasn't really getting taught, and the most important one was trim, which I'd learned accidentally, and all of a sudden my arrow toe in Condor jumped from crashing every takeoff to successful arrow toe, and that one, as soon as I showed the kids, and there is a lesson on trim, they're like, wow, this is so much better, blah blah blah. And it really does say something for, if you're going to be doing ab initio training, you really do have to have someone who's proficient in Condor, but also an instructor to say, look, this is handy, this is handy. Going to the spiral dive question, there are things in that, and as an instructor I wanted to test out the VR goggles. You're exactly right about pausing it as soon as you feel the onset of nausea, because it's visual, there's no body feedback. That disconnect sets up the fight, flight, or faint response in your brain, and so that's where it's coming from. But it takes a little bit to get used to. Having said that, I was able to do spins, loops, wing overs, all that sort of stuff. If you crank the volume, then at least you get your second airspeed indicator. The horizons, the horizon's the first, ears are the second, ASI is the third, and all of a sudden you get this really immersive training. I won't say it's exactly the same, but you can certainly build a muscle memory. And to see these kids go from zero to hero a lot easier and cheaper than they would in real life. It really is a fantastic tool.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I would like to see how they do. They didn't do a lot of sims last year, but this year I'd like to see how they progress into the K-21 in real life. The other thing I was going to say is I do have some friends that we would go racing, whatever. They're like, oh, I'm going to fly an Arcus in Argentina. Okay, that's nice. I fly Jantar. My big thing was getting my diamond goal, and so I set out a course in Southern Ontario, and they don't have a Jantar, so I got ASW 19. So I flew something similar and set up the day to how it would be in my area, 5,000 foot ceiling, and you're sitting in the chair for 3 hours, 4 hours, 5 hours, but it's realistic, and you have to push through. And in that sense, it really does help you figure out a lot of stuff. If you set it up realistically and don't go for the super ship, and you're flying where you're going to be flying at your club or something close enough to it, I think you really do get maximum benefit from it.
Yeah,
anyway,
absolutely. So with the soaring, or with the team, are they is it more focused on like kind of beginner training, or are they actually are they trying to learn kind of more of the racing side with that group?
No, right now they're ab initio strictly, and they're using it to augment, well, in this case, to initialize their training. Because they joined the team in the autumn.
I see.
They've all had fam flights in real life, so they all had an intro flight, and they got they had an instructor obviously going up with them and try the hands, feet, and the controls. But to actually sit down and go through lesson by lesson by lesson, so they're doing the whole modulus. The thing that sucks about the training is that it's set in mountainous areas. And we're Southern Ontario, we don't have mountains. And so, for them to look at the horizon, and it's all jaggy, that's a bit of a negative.
Have you looked at the gliding school curriculum? I can't remember offhand what
Yeah,
settings they use.
it's all the canned lessons, but because it's made in the program's made in Slovakia, that's what they used for or Slovenia. That's what they used for the default is Slovenian terrain.
Right.
Yeah, so it kind of sucks for us flatlanders, but for people who fly out in mountain regions, I'm sure it's fine. And you can infer the horizon if you have enough experience. But and the VR goggles make it great, so you can check, look left wing, right wing, and look at your height above the horizon, check wings level. That's really, really handy. But yeah, it kind of sucked for the terrain for finding the horizon.
Okay. Now this is a location-based simulator that they get to go do some time in, kind of after leisure.
Yeah, it's down by the wind tunnels at TMU in your aerospace engineering.
Yeah. How much time do they actually use it? Like how much time do they get actually on the sim?
They have 1 hour blocks that they do, and they've got a roster set up. So there's 6 students, ab initios, and then there's 6 veterans from last year. And so they're on it regularly, like twice a week, 3 times a week.
Okay, so they are getting some actual time. I'm assuming because of the proximity of it to their actual classes and their sort of rhythms of the university life.
That's exactly it. We found in real life in the summer, they have co-op or part-time jobs or whatever, and so their activity at the club was kind of limited, and so the ones we had last summer didn't progress very well at all. They were stuck on speed control and coordinated turns. They could start shooting landings, maybe a couple spin stalls, but none of them went solo. So we're really hoping that that this winter of Condor is going to pay off some big dividends with shortened real life training.
Yeah, I definitely think it will. The kind of the examples and the evidence that I see, I mean, it only makes sense because you're doing very, very close to the same thing, particularly VR for like things like circuits that really gets the depth perception is a big factor. Is VR can really help with that component of things and judging circuits. I wonder, however, like as I kind of teased at a little bit, just as like as a concept is, the ability for a person to get Condor and then get hooked on it so that they're kind of getting that like intrinsically motivated, like I just want to play this for fun. And then they get 100 hours, 150 hours over the winter. And then the leap that would make in their proficiency, I think would be, I think it would be fantastic because you're getting into that zone where it's starting to really get familiar into the muscle memory. So I think there's good potential for using it earlier and earlier. And I've heard of clubs, maybe not very many, that have a waiting list for students. And I think that could be a great compliment where it's like, oh, you're on the waiting list. Okay. Do this in Condor and, that's while you're waiting. So I think there's good opportunity for that. And as you may kind of gather from my perspective is essentially like, if you're serious about the sport, you're basically, not very serious about it if you're not training in Condor. And it's okay to be recreational. That's fine. But if you're like, this is, I'm all in on the sport, you probably really should be in Condor because it's just where it's at for being able to train and learn. So I think for students, that same sort of thing can apply in the grand scheme of how much they're paying to learn to glide and to get started. Investing in a Condor setup is still a pretty small fraction that has huge return. Or if there's barriers there, getting club-based setups that can be portable and rentable.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah. Well, the other thing too, your point was really well stated. It's the last thing I'll say is that the round out flare, hold off, that only lasts for a couple of seconds, and that's really the hardest part to teach. Yeah. And I know that a lot of clubs, especially in Europe and in Japan, the clubs that I went to, they have motor gliders, and so they'll just bash out circuits in the motor glider.
Okay.
and then they can teach that part specifically, buzz off a low circuit, come back down, shoot another one, and everybody gets it. But it's not, it gets cost prohibitive because most clubs are heading up towards $50 for an arrow tow to 2,000 feet, up in and around that area. And so that gets really prohibitive to teach something that only lasts for 5 seconds. So I think Condor is a way easier way to teach that. And the bonus is that in the summer, the simulator is going to come back to the clubhouse up at Toronto Soaring. And so we can augment the teaching up there for not just the Ryerson kids, but also for the club students.
Okay. Yeah. I would say the thing that I find a little slightly limiting maybe in Condor is the resolution close to the ground. I feel like it still works good for round out, but I feel like if there's a little bit higher fidelity at that kind of near distance, I feel the round out would even improve that much more. Hopefully Condor 3 is improved in that regard, and I think that will help with that round out component even more.
Yeah. Thanks again for putting this on. This was excellent. And thanks again, Jorg, for hosting all this.
You're most welcome. Ryan, there was another question on the chat, and the person who asked the question, he wants to know your secrets why you're winning all these races, right?
Yeah. Well, that's the part I don't know. So I try to, I guess I tried to keep it at like the principle level. And the principle is repeat practice and analysis.
Ryan, can you demonstrate?
Oh, go ahead. So I think Jorg might have muted people because there was noise there.
Sorry, I muted somebody who wanted to ask a question. Sorry.
The question more like demand, or it's a question. Ryan, can you demonstrate an analysis of a flight? How you analyze a flight?
Yes, I can. I do have that open, and I will show this. So let me go through an example of this here. I just did a recording of a flight analysis that I'll show you quickly, but I can share the recording as well, so you could watch it. So I use a tool particularly called Show Condor IGC, which I think is a lot better than CU. And so my analysis, just kind of briefly, is I start with a high level, and so I'll get kind of all the comparables loaded into this calculation. This is similar to like what Davis sends with his spreadsheet reports. And then I'll see, okay, high level climb rates, what the kind of average airspeed was, what the netto was. So this is VMET, and that's essentially the netto. So was I getting better glide than expected? The delta GN is how well I did on glide above what's expected from the polar. And then I can see the amount of detail. So I see sort of high level, like, was I climbing well? And you'll usually see the people at the top, it's all the consistent thing is they're climbing the best. And then what I'll do for analysis is Show Condor IGC gives me the ability to kind of do a deep dive into 3 tracks at a time. So for this example here, I took the two top tracks for comparison, and then I took another track that was asking for some analysis, and I put it in there so I could compare it. And then I would look at those in kind of a deeper detail. And I could go to the actual view and see these. Am I screen sharing still? I should ask that.
Yes.
Okay. Mm-hmm. I lost like the border that showed I was screen sharing. I'm like, oh shoot. So I can go to summary view, and I can see basically some of the same information with a little bit more. So like I can see delta GN, which is basically my glide segments versus the distance of the task, and which was kind of informative to say if I'm drifting upwind or downwind with my thermaling. It'll give a bit of a percentage on that. And then I can also see like per each leg, sort of the summary stats, which can be really useful to understand kind of what my performance was on a per leg basis. So I can get a little bit more detail in the high level, like the summary stats. And then what I can do is I can go to the section stats. I can follow a specific glider. So let's say I'm following Green because I want to look at what he's doing. I can go to this, the section. What I'll do is I'll right click on the barograph. And this is a really useful view because what it gives me is basically a map of what my thermaling was like from the strongest thermal on the left to the weakest thermal on the right. And what I can say that's really informative with this, in this example, I can see that I'm blue here, and I had the strongest thermals. I had the best luck, let's say, like some really good thermals. But down at this end, this is where the race is won and lost, and typically is the weak thermals, because you lose a lot more time in weak thermals than you gain in strong thermals. So I can see and it gives like a really visual representation of like, how is my thermaling doing? How many weak thermals did I take? And this is where, because of those, I think I showed those like kind of samples I did of 1/360 that lost me the race. And I can see it visually. I can visually see losing the race in my thermal selection. So that's a really kind of useful high level picture. And then I can go here and I can start to look at it segment by segment. I can zoom way in. Something that is really useful for new people is try to highlight like, often like we emphasize like soaring is 90% decision making, and I say yes, it is. At the elite level, it's 90% decision making, but the beginner level, there's a lot of technique that goes into things, and bad technique can cost you a lot of time. So I can dive into this, and then I can see on a per section basis, I can see the energy compensated climb rates. I can see the first 60 seconds of the thermal. I can see the last 60 seconds of the thermal. And I can see the uncompensated climb rate. And I can see the bank, and I can see the turn radius. So it starts to give me good information about the thermal, and I can see how much time that thermal has gained or cost me, or cost this person relative to the task and to the other thermals in the task. So it gives me on a thermal by thermal, like really, it gives a good insight and good basis on it. And then if it's AITs are worse because they're more spread out, you're not flying kind of you're not flying directly against people as much. But when you have a race where you're in the same thermal as other people, you can start to see, did this person climb way better? What was their bank? What was the airspeed that they were flying at? Even on like, for this pilot who's newer, I was able to kind of see in the barograph, I could see all the noise in the pitch, all the noise in the airspeed, where he's like the top pilots is a lot smoother, whereas there's tons of noise. So I was able to pinpoint the main issue you're having is actually your pitch control. So I was able to see in the barograph, and for him, I think it was really, insightful. It's like, oh, okay, that was helpful to know that it's like pitch control is where I need to start focusing. So yeah, it goes. I can see kind of each glide segment. I don't use that as much as the thermal segments. And then I can see, so for example, like here, you can see like not only the airspeed all over the place, but you see the thermal circle is not organized. And I was able to say, okay, well, thermaling, less is more. If I look at, if I look at a good thermal, you see like that nice, tight, very consistent, very organized spiral shape. Whereas beginners, you're going to see a very disorganized kind of thermal shape. So that gives some insight and some information. So I'm able to look at it high level, then I'm able to dive down and look at it on a per thermal and sort of on like a track level basis. So I find this tool to be really useful. And that goes to the question about like being fast. A lot of it's the analysis and understanding where you're losing time, where you're gaining time, and then pinpointing those skills. And thermaling being the number one to really get dialed in. Thermaling and thermal selection. Hopefully that helps with the question.
Can you show us how to set the trim in Condor?
To set it like in flight, or just to like the settings for it?
Yeah, let's say you want to adjust your trim. I don't know how to adjust my trim in Condor.
So again, you want to go to your setup, and you're going to go to your input and you're going to see what you have your trim set for. So if you have it set on a joystick, you can set it to a joystick and then use that. Or you can scroll down, you can see what keys you use for the trimmer up or down. So that's how you adjust it. And here's a really important tip. Uncheck this box in Condor. Strict stick trim where available. That is your enemy. Uncheck that thing. It's really confusing to people. I'll just say uncheck it. Unless you have force feedback joystick. Basically what that is, gliders where you have like a button you can press to set your stick trim versus like versus a lever. Is trying to mimic that, but it really confuses people. Everyone leaves it checked, and then on half the gliders, you don't have any trim. So uncheck that and your trim will work according to whatever axis you have it assigned to.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. This is great. So we are working on integrating Condor into the basic training, but also integrating it into cross-country training, particularly in our cross-country safety program we are currently developing. So one thing came up that made me think. I think somebody mentioned they were basically writing with their students using the communication thing there. Name escapes me in
Discord.
the moment. Discord, yeah. So that sounds an interesting thing. Basically, that's one of the things. If I would work with a student, how can I see what he's doing, right?
Yeah.
Not being in the same room.
Yeah, I would set up Discord. I think if a person wanted to develop more the concept of like a loaner or an at-home sort of training system, I think there could be other components added to that where you could actually build in even some automation. So when they start a lesson, it records for them, or even like a webcam, which then would record the student's actual physical. You could see what they're doing physically. So there could be ways to to really build a robust instructional tool, but it would involve some creativity and adding some of these things on. But Discord is probably the most convenient way to hop in the cockpit with them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really interesting. And Phil is saying that he feels he's stalled in his progress, right? I feel the same thing. I made when I started flying Condor, I was made pretty quick progress in these contests, but then there came a point where I just don't get any better. I think it's my ability not to be able to read the Condor clouds properly. Anyways.
Yeah. Condor clouds are tricky, but I just in preparing for this, I saw like a potential like trick, or I never saw that time lapse of the thermals before, and I was like, oh, if you set up a flight and just let it run and like record the time lapse, that would actually be useful information, because I still don't have confidence in Condor clouds. I feel like sometimes I think I know how to read the clouds, but then I'm guessing. To me, I'm more in terms of thermal entry. What I started doing is I sort of set thresholds for my netto, where I say, okay, I'm expecting thermals of this strength. Let's say an 8 knot thermal is going to be what I want as my minimum. And then as I'm entering the thermal, I'm looking for two things. I'm reading my netto to see what it gets. And I'm watching how aggressive, like how responsive the vario is. If it's picking up slowly, or if it's picking up strongly, or if it's picking up way too fast, which then means it's too narrow and it's not good. So I'm looking at those things. And then it's like, okay, well, if I don't get a netto of at least, like 9, I'm just going to fly straight through. Let's say I get a netto of 9. I'm not sure. I'm going to start turning. And if that netto doesn't increase to 9.5 or whatever level, then I'm going to bail before I start turning backwards. So I start kind of putting thresholds on. And then after a full circle, if I haven't seen, a netto of like 9.5, 10, I'm going to bail off. So I kind of make these threshold points of what value I want for the netto, which then allows me to be more selective on the thermal during the entry. And that can really help. Now, caveat being is always balancing in is there another do you have another option after that? If you don't have another option, you better just hope that you didn't hit it clean and that you actually center a strong thermal. But if you have options after, then bail and hit the next thermal. So I think that helps with the selection. The other thing, and this is where I say, like, I think one of the best things with Condor, and that's where I showed the example of like getting it really fine tunes like very precise optimization like for thermaling. And I use that with Condor. I use the Reichman method primarily for thermal centering and using and very small adjustments, very fine tuning, and getting that little extra like on every like kind of peak, getting that tightening in a little bit, hooking that a little bit more. I'm able to optimize the climb. And then on like the tasks we do in proving grounds are sort of the, they're the extreme wide and easy to thermal side. And then some of these FIA tasks are more on the challenging side. But that really precise thermaling, I think Condor's really good for getting that dialed in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. I looked at some of your flights, and what I saw is that your climb rates are always better than mine, number one. But I also saw that you take about twice as many thermals than I do. So that's quite interesting.
Oh, in terms of I'll do that too, where it's the like get high, stay high thing. If I take a thermal, if it's good, even if I get 2 turns out of it and it keeps me high, and then it allows me to sample more thermals later on, or it gives me something in the bank to be selective down the road. It's a high risk, high reward strategy. If you do like get really low, and if you get really low and you hook a boomer and you're in it for a long time, that's really good, but it's kind of a high risk. It's a high risk. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, thank you very much. Thank you so much. This was really an eye opener for me as well, and particularly as we can use it for training and improve our training. Winter is long, and we can do a lot of things. So, quick other question from your talk. My feeling is you got into Condor so around 2021 or 2020.
Yeah.
Or did you get earlier into it?
No, so I had Condor in 2010, and like Condor 1, and I was really into I kind of got into virtual reality pretty kind of at the very early stage. It wasn't in Condor, close to that, but anyway, I got into simulators for the purpose of hang gliding training, and like how can I use simulators in hang gliding training. So I dabbled in Condor, probably like a handful of tasks, but I noticed it was a big difference for my my training. And then in 2020, I did a handful of tasks in 2020. That's when I got virtual reality. And then 2021 in like November or something, I was like, it was the Saskatchewan winter. That's what did it. And then I was like, okay, this is my winter thing. And so I got really into it then. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's I actually got into it in 2021 during COVID as well, because there were no competitions. And my good friend Ray Wood got me into that.
Yeah.
Thank Ray. And how many, that's my last question, I promise.
I'm happy to sit around and chat. This is I like this topic.
How many contests do you fly a week? How many contest tasks do you fly a week?
So I try to do, like when I was training for the like when I was kind of like my first season was probably my most, and I was doing about three and a half a week. Now I'm doing 2 or 3, and the only reason for that is because you just got to limit, you got to cut the addiction off at some point, so like it's just, you just got to draw the line. I would do more if if there was no other factors in life, but 2 or 3 a week is still I have to balance that with, it's still a pretty big focus, and it's because I'm very I am pretty serious about the sport. So
Mm-hmm.
it's for me, it's like for me, it's training. But the cool thing, as I mentioned, it's like free training because it's also I really, really want to do it.
Yeah, really good. Hey, thank you very much. And yeah, thanks. And if there's no more questions, and yeah, by the way, see you later tonight at Proving Grounds, right?
Yeah, Jorg, what I can do is I can try to put together some links because I just didn't want to spend too much time on like the tactile like how to's because that can just take a long time. But I can probably compile a few links to share to some of the practical stuff, and then what I probably needs to be done for Condor is like a comprehensive start to finish how to video of like all the different setup pieces because there's just so many little pieces. I started working on that last week when I was setting up a computer for one of the local pilots, but that's something that can maybe be in the works, which would be a very helpful resource.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that would be great. Yeah, it's if you can put a few links together, we can easily disseminate them along with the recording and what we have there. That would be super.
I'd like to follow on with Ryan since he's got some time. I don't know if you want to stop the recording or not. It's up to you.
Feel free to stop the recording. And
okay, I'll record that. I'll stop that.
So just following